There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch by Collider.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon. We have a little bit of a different show tonight because of this national story of course, the Titan sub that went missing on Monday. And, of course, we were all hoping for a rescue and a happy ending to this, as we all want the best. When we see major events like this in the world, we always hope that the folks would be saved and return home to their loved ones. Well, that wasn't to be in this case. And there's so many things that we're going to talk about tonight in regards to this case. But I'd like to first just mention the folks who lost their lives. Stockton Rush, who was the CEO of Ocean Gate Expeditions, that took all these people down, or attempted to take these people down to view the Titanic. Hamish Harding, an Action Aviation chairman. Frenchman Paul-Henri Largelet, Premier Expeditions Director. Shahzada Dawood and his son, Suleiman Dawood. We want to mourn with their families and pray for their souls. But all these folks, in this, I guess in the spirit of great adventurers, lost their lives. And when you think about this and the risks that these folks took, it is sort of baffling, because there were many things wrong, which we'll get to later on in discussing this case. And you must realize that the Titanic is over 2 miles deep in the ocean, 450 miles from land. Just think of a submersible going down there, and we all know, we've been watching the news basically 24/7 since this happened. The tremendous pressure that a submersible or submarine must be able to withstand in order to take this deep dive to observe the Titanic. And we're going to get into some of the warning signs that occurred before this even this expedition went down and these 5 people were in this submersible. The extensive waivers they were made to sign, the fact that the submersible had no certification, all of those things we're going to discuss. But first, I'm going to introduce my 2 guests tonight. And with us tonight, the very affable, very smart mother of 5, former attorney, actress, jack of all trades, basically, Melanie Little. Welcome to the show tonight, Melanie.
Thanks, Phil. How are you today?
Very good. You know, people always wondering, what is Melanie going to wear tonight? You're almost like Vanna White. What shirt is Melanie going to wear tonight?
It's a little oceanic, I thought.
And you never disappoint. You never disappoint. That's for sure. And we have a double treat with us tonight. Another crowd favorite, a fan favorite, retired NYPD sergeant, professor, lawyer, and lately I've been calling him Father Geary because he's got that real mellow way about him. Mike Geary, welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, Billy. Good to see you. Bless you, my son. And good evening, Melanie.
Thank you. I could use all the blessings that anyone wants to give to me. So, you know, we've been watching this obviously since Monday, and we've learned so many new things about it since Monday. And people, I think what we had spoken about it, what we'd really like to concentrate here is the human element. And, you know, human beings have been explorers and adventurers since the beginning of time. And you would think a situation like this, A, you have to be an explorer. B, you have to be an adventurer. And because this costs $250,000 per person, you have to be a person of means just to want to take this trip or to be able to take this trip. But also, you had to be a risk taker, a rather big risk taker. Melanie, your thoughts?
100%. This is everyone's got an opinion on this story. There are more stories in the news right now than I could even keep up with today reading about these stories, and everyone's got an opinion on it. But I think the one thing that we need to remember is that this is a tragedy, no matter which way you look at it. There are 5 casualties here. My heart goes out to their families, but this is an international story that has captured everyone's attention, which is why we wanted to cover it tonight, even though it's technically not a true crime story. So if you have any questions or anything you want us to address, please put it in the chat and we'll take a look, see what we can do.
You know, Melanie, I think that one of the reasons we wanted to cover this is everyone's covering this story. And we don't, I purposely didn't watch any other podcasts.
Yeah, FOMO, Bill,
But-
is that it?
No, because I want to have a fresh point of view on it and our point of view, no one else's.
Mhm. Right.
But I just wanted to say also, here's a picture of the submersible there. This is from the New York Times. Years before OceanGate's submersible craft went missing in the Atlantic Ocean, with 5 people on board, the company faced several warnings as it prepared for its hallmark mission of taking wealthy passengers to tour the Titanic's wreckage. It was January 2018, and the company's engineering team was about to hand over the craft, named Titan, to a new crew who would be responsible for ensuring the safety of its future passengers. But experts inside and outside the company were beginning to sound alarms. OceanGate's director of marine operations, David Lockridge, started working on a report around that time, according to court documents, ultimately producing a scathing document in which he said the craft needed more testing and stressed the potential dangers to passengers of the Titan as the submersible reached extreme depths. 2 months later, OceanGate faced similar dire calls from more than 36 people, industry leaders, deep sea explorers, and oceanographers, who warned in a letter to its chief executive, Stockton Rush, that the company's experimental approach and its decision to forego a traditional assessment could lead to potentially catastrophic problems with the Titanic mission. Now, as the international search for the craft enters another day, more is coming to light about the warnings leveled at OceanGate as the company raced to provide extreme tourism for the wealthy. All those warnings, and yet smart people, really smart people, chose to ignore these warnings. Is that what we were talking about before? The spirit of adventure and the spirit of risk taking? Mike, I'm going to direct that one to you.
Yeah, Billy. There's no great reward without great risk. And, Mr. Solomon was a businessman, a billionaire. He took many financial risks. So he was a risk taker, perhaps by nature. He could withstand the stress of that sort of dealing. And, the company was set up as an experimental company and to take people down to the wreckage of the Titanic. And it seemed to be that they did seem to rush through on the design and the testing and did ignore their own internal warnings. Mr. Lockridge had pointed out that one of the escape doors on the submersible was certified to 1,400 meters, which is like 4,200 feet down. But the Titanic itself is down about 1,600 meters, much farther down. And as you keep going farther and farther down, the stress on the metal increases exponentially. And so sadly, the people who are willing to take the greatest risk, unfortunately, they in this case, it backfired on them. But their spirit is the typical spirit of the American. We talked about like the Apollo program years ago. There's no great reward without great risk. You got to take risks to advance the underwater science, the engineering, the exploration. That the risk and accepting risk is part of it.
Mike, one of the things, and this could be directed to you or Melanie, is that you would expect on a vessel like this for there to be redundancy. And by that, I mean, if the electricity goes out, what's the plan? You know what I mean? If there's no power and you're down 2 miles, what is the plan? How do you how do you notify the surface that you're in trouble? One of the things that most vessels have on them is something called a GPS beacon that can show searchers where you are. They even have those on survivor suits. You know, they have those big red survivor suits that the Coast Guard uses. One of the things they all have on them is a GPS beacon so that they can find you just by that beacon hitting your location to them. They didn't even have that. The other thing that would terrify me is that the only way to get out of this vessel was to rely on someone on the surface. So you could not open this hatch from the inside. So without the help of someone outside the vessel, you couldn't even get out of that vessel, even if it was out of the water, if it was on the surface. To me, that's pretty damn scary, Melanie.
My understanding is that GPS will not work 2.5 miles below sea level. So these guys, they're 2.5 miles down. GPS doesn't work. They were communicating with the surface boat by text message. And that's the way they would communicate. You know, there are only a handful of these submersibles that are even able to go down that far. There are a couple other ones that have also gone to the Titanic, but this one is the only one that sat 5 people. All of the other ones in existence only sat 2 people. So this was, you know, a pioneering operation by this guy, the CEO, Stockton Rush, who really believed in his invention. He believed in it so much that he went down there and perished with the passengers. So,
but
you know,
Melanie,
I don't know.
something by communicating by text, how does a phone work 2 miles below the surface of the
I'm not
ocean?
an engineer and I'm not a techie, but that's what my research revealed today from everything that I watched. And I've been following this closely for the past couple of days. I mean, I think a lot of
Right.
us were glued to the news because we were all worried about these people. And my children were even worried, you know, they're running out of oxygen. What's going to happen? That's my understanding of the technology. If anybody knows anything different, let me know.
Well, you know, Melanie, to address the beacon thing, you're right. It doesn't work below the surface. What they were supposed to have was something that would actually release the beacon and it would float to the surface and ping, you know, directly above them, 2 miles above them. But they didn't even have that because apparently that put too much weight on their vessel, the extra weight that they didn't want. So all of these things were shortcuts, but scary shortcuts. You know, it's like the technology is there in even other sports. For example, skiing. Skiers that are skiing in avalanche prone locations have this special inflatable that if they get covered by snow, it inflates and gives them enough room around their body to breathe. And it also has a GPS beacon so that diggers can spot them. But mostly important, this device clears snow away from them so that they have enough air surrounding them to survive until they get rescued. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Billy, I'm a 1970s kid, and I remember watching the TV show Jacques Cousteau, The Undersea World, and they had those submersibles, and they always had radio communications because they were not going down nearly that far, and so there was not that tremendous pressure, and so I think you really would have to have some sort of like tether with a radio line, but you probably wouldn't be able to go down that far. And you take a look at the Apollo space program and NASA engineering. They talk about redundancy constantly. If you have one system, you have none. If you have 2 systems, you've got one. So, you know, there's always a redundancy, and it's a huge safety factor for people. When you just look at our own Apollo program, how few astronauts we actually did lose over the course of that program. And it was virtually a guarantee that you would return home, even as experimental as it was, because of the fabulous engineering. But that was a slow, steady grind, making mistakes, you know, with unmanned capsules and things like that. This, because it was for profit and he wanted to get it into a profitability mode as soon as possible. You're right. He skipped a lot and cut a lot of corners. And unfortunately, you know, for everyone concerned, even the industry realized that he'd cut a lot of corners, and he was chided by the industry years previously for the design and the designation, of using certain, like, didn't he used a composite material rather than like steel and things like that. So there was standards out there, and he did, in his quest to get there fast, he did ignore the standards.
But remember also,
okay.
this
Oh,
exact
go ahead,
vessel made 2 previous expeditions that were successful in 2021 and 2022. So,
Right.
if you're ready to go on this thing, you're like, all right, well, it's already been down there twice and it was successful. So I think the third time was not the charm. I don't think that the hull or whatever this, the composite was able to withstand a third dive down that deeply. And I think that's part of the problem.
Great point, Melanie. We as Americans also, we always expect happy outcomes. You remember those kids in the cave that were stuck under the ground? They're trying to figure out how to get them. And, the oxygen was, they had no food, they were cold. And that was amazing that they made that rescue. I can talk how I felt, and Mike can tell you the same thing, how helpless we felt at the 9/11 site when we realized that after a certain amount of time, we weren't saving anyone. And even though they said it was a rescue mission for the first 3 or 4 days, it was clear that it was a recovery mission I'm not going to say exactly, but 8, 10, 12 hours into it, clearly it was a recovery mission. And it's a horrible feeling. And in this case also, all the rescue vehicles, the ships, all the equipment had to come from 24, 48 hours away. And there's no easy or fast way to get the equipment there. They just have to wait. I want to play a little bit of this. This is some of the folks that were waiting to go on this trip, and just to see how important this was to them.
I wanted to go to Titanic.
But the star of the show is the Titan, Stockton Rush's custom-built submersible. 5-inch thick carbon fiber, capped on each end by a dome of titanium. If all went well, I myself would be spending about 12 hours sealed inside on a dive to the Titanic. Not gonna lie, I was a little nervous.
An experimental submersible vessel that has not been approved or certified by any regulatory body and could result in physical injury, disability, emotional trauma, or death. Where do I sign? Oh,
Take your shoes off, that's customary.
okay. Wow.
Inside, the sub has about as much room as a minivan.
So this is not your grandfather's submersible. We only have one button, that's it. It should be like an elevator. It shouldn't take a lot of skill.
The Titan is the only 5-person sub in the world that can reach Titanic depths, 2.4 miles below the sea. It's also the only one with a toilet, sort of. And yet I couldn't help noticing how many pieces of this sub seemed improvised.
We can use these off-the-shelf components.
I got these from Camper World. We run the whole thing with this game controller.
Come on. It seems like this submersible has some elements of MacGyver-y jerry-rigness. I mean, you're putting construction pipes as ballast.
I don't know if I'd use that description of it, but there's certain things that you want to be buttoned down. So the pressure vessel is not MacGyver at all, because that's where we work with Boeing and NASA and the University of Washington. Everything else can fail. Your thrusters can go, your lights can go, you're still going to be safe.
But when expedition manager Kyle Bingham studied the forecast for our Titanic dive, he concluded that the waves would be too big to launch the sub.
We're looking at 6 feet, and then it bumps up a little bit.
Our Titanic adventure would have to wait. But Stockton Rush offered our CBS crew a consolation dive to the continental shelf 80 miles away.
Apparently there's a lot of sheer cliffs underwater to see, shark breeding ground. They say it's really cool.
The crew closes the hatch from the outside with 17 bolts. There's no other way out. Here's how the launch is supposed to go. The sub is attached to a huge floating platform. Motorboats drag it down the big orange ramp into the sea.
We're in the water, we're floating. Woo!
They are going to come and prepare the platform for the next phase, which is the sinking.
The platform submerges to around 30 feet, where the water is much calmer than on the surface.
You're in the water, people.
Divers detach the sub from the platform, and away you go, in theory.
Hull integrity, holding.
And what happened next? You won't be disappointed, as we'll show you a little later on Sunday morning.
I am already claustrophobic just watching that. I think there's too many moving parts there. There's too many people that you have to rely on other than yourself. 16 bolts to attach the hatch. What happened to the guy that detaches the hatch? Oh, he's on coffee break. I mean, just too many people you have to rely on. And as you said before, Melanie, the hull, it's made of composite fiber wound filament. And you said it went on 2 or 3 trips prior to this. So even metal gets fatigued. So how about this composite fiber wound filament? It obviously gets fatigued and it gets weaker on each trip it goes on.
Look, I'm not even letting my kids get on the Ferris wheel at the carnival once I see like who's operating that thing and how rusty the bolts are. Like you would never catch me on this thing. You couldn't pay me to go on this thing. But there are people who are very adventuresome and they're explorers and the risk takers. There was only that one little window, by the way, for a sightseeing tour of the wreck of the Titanic. It would be nice if it was all, glass. I mean, obviously I'm not an engineer. I don't know if it was all glass so you could actually see from where you were sitting on this little floor, what you were looking at, take some pictures. But it was just that one little window that was only about this big that they could see out of, which I found interesting as well.
I find it all interesting, but I find it incredibly scary. And as Mike said, there's people that take great risks to discoverers, adventurers. How about the Discovery that exploded upon with all those? They had civilians on it that one time. That was horrible, and no one expected that to happen. Everyone thinks, "Oh, this is space travel is safe," And we're all old enough to remember I believe it was one of the Apollos that.
Apollo 13.
Apollo 13 burned to a crisp, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's Apollo 7 with Chafee and Grissom.
Yes,
and White.
Yeah, and there was so many things wrong with it, and that's NASA. Right. So imagine this, and they were using the word NASA to describe how technically advanced this material was, but obviously not enough. Mike?
Yeah, Billy. There was. Even NASA, with its wonderful record from the time of the Mercury to the Gemini to the Apollo program from the early 60s up to the mid 70s, we do know there was some tragedy, obviously, and remember the Challenger explosion in the 80s. But overall, the record was phenomenal and it couldn't be beat. But here, you don't have the backing of an entire nation, an entire government, and like 200 some odd contractors and subcontractors building this redundancy into the system. You have one man who wants to, invent, the submersible himself, and is probably using some of the technology that's out there that other submersibles use. But on the other hand, can't duplicate it, perhaps maybe because of the cost. And obviously, I think even in a 2018 interview, the CEO said, yeah, he may have cut some corners. And sadly, it was probably a fabulous submarine for anything up to, 800 to 1,000 feet. But once you get, keep going down, the pressure is exponentially greater. And so we're not sure the previous submersions, if there was any sort of stress testing and damage assessment, like Melanie pointed out, and you pointed out, the fatigue sets in and makes the metal weaker. So it's a sad day for everybody on this case.
Absolutely. I'm oversimplifying it, but I couldn't help but think you have to have your car inspected once a year. Yet this submersible, which was doing a much more dangerous mission than driving your car, uh, was not certified, was not inspected. And one of the things was, and we all asked, like, well, where are the agencies that do this? Guess what? He was very smart. That's why he did it in international waters. Therefore, the U.S. Coast Guard had no jurisdiction over him. He was between the Bahamas, Newfoundland, Canada. No one had jurisdiction. And that was the method of his madness. He did that on purpose. Melanie.
That's correct. He wanted to avoid having any inspections because this was completely experimental, which was also fully disclosed to all of the passengers that paid to go on this thing. I mean, he was not subject to the regulations of the U.S. Coast Guard, or I don't even think he was subject to, even though he launched off Canada, I don't think he was subject to their regulations either. So he was out in no man's land, basically.
Absolutely. Let me play a little bit this from this. It was well done by Fox.
With Campbell University, who's been guiding us through this story throughout the course of the week, and he joins me now. Thanks so much for being with us yet again. I know we talked to you earlier this afternoon. We wanted to get you, though, here in prime time because, and Sal, there's this story that's breaking right now in the Wall Street Journal. I want to put up the headline here, and this is what they are reporting. A top secret U.S. Navy detection system designed to spot enemy submarines first heard the Titan submersible implosion days ago. So from your expertise and experience, were they involved at all with the search effort? And if not, why not?
Well, this is the SOSUS array, and this was used to detect Soviet during the Cold War days submarines coming in. It's an array of listening devices on the ocean floor. And what makes the SOSUS array really unique is that it can hear at those really deep levels. And more importantly, because there's multiple arrays, they can actually triangulate in. So they should have been able to determine a approximate position of where that explosion took place. It really depends on where the arrays are located. And this area here is a tough one to get into because you're coming up against the continental shelf. But again, they would not exactly know what that explosion was. What they would have detected is a noise. And again, not exactly clear if it's an implosion noise or just a noise in general. I think going back through, they were able to seed through the data and figure out, okay, this is an anomalous noise. Now we need to go investigate it.
You know, I just want to make a comment, Melanie. You and Mike are welcome to comment also. I think they probably knew that they did what they heard was an implosion, but I don't think they wanted to make the call. I don't think they wanted to make the bad news call that early without giving further evidence that, oh, it wasn't just the sound we heard. Now we have a debris field. Once you hear that, then it's sort of confirmed. Melanie?
Yeah, I think they wanted to keep it a rescue mission instead of a recovery mission. That was my gut feeling on that. You know, what good would it have done, I guess? Mike?
Right. An early diagnosis as compared to let's just wait a couple of days and
they wanted to make
100%.
sure, I think. They
Right,
wanted
exactly.
to be absolutely certain.
Yeah, Mike?
No, you're right. There's, the Coast Guard's involved. The Navy had technology there. You had you had airplanes, you had helicopters. The Canadian Coast Guard, I think the French even had a vessel coming over to help out. You know, you put the machine into motion, the rescue machine into motion, rescue operation machine into motion. You don't want to call it you say, oh, guys, I know we started about 8 hours ago, but we've already got certification that it's an implosion, and based on our data, let's just call this off. Now, you don't want to do that, because if you are wrong, and it does come to light sometime in the future that they may have been alive for like 2 or 3 days or 4 days, and you'd called it off after, say, 24 hours, there would have been a huge scandal. So I think what the Navy did was right. You're not absolutely positively sure, you go on, you do the best you can, you hope for the best, keep your fingers crossed, but you don't want to call it quits immediately based on your suspicions. I think Melanie's right. They did the right thing.
I think what we were all sweating too is just not being in any way emotionally connected to this, but yet you are emotionally connected to it. We were hoping and praying they weren't suffering. For example, not getting air or it being so freezing in that sub that they were almost freezing to death. Those are the things that I think everyone was thinking about. And would it have made the families feel better if the Navy had said, "Oh, it imploded at X amount"? I don't think that would have made them feel better, and I don't think they wanted to make that call.
And that's what we're hearing now, is that they think it was immediate and
Yeah.
that there was no suffering.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
because
Billy,
according to
they
the Wall
even
Street
had
Journal
an
report,
article.
it says shortly after the submersible's disappearance Sunday, the U.S. system detected what it suspected was the sound of an implosion near the debris site discovered Thursday. I want to get to the news when we woke up this morning that some debris had been found. When you heard that news, what went through your mind? To me, because we heard from Coast Guard officials, they found it about 1,600 feet from the Titanic wreck site itself. That's about 5 football fields in length. That's pretty close if you want to kind of parse through, how close that was or how not close that was. So to me, I was kind of thinking, what took them so long if it was that close to the Titanic wreck site of finding some debris at all?
Sure. I mean, so to put this into context, 1,600 feet, twice the length of Titanic. The reason it took them this long is they had to do this search with an ROV. And basically, what you had was the visual imagery from the ROV, which is only, depending on the visibility down there, maybe a few meters. So again, imagine, searching through several football fields, and the only thing you can look at is maybe a yard in front of you and a yard to each side. And you just have to go up and down and cover that entire area. And probably once they got those ROVs on site, they went down to Titanic itself because they knew that's where Titan was going, and probably worked out a search grid to cover the area around Titanic, working their way out. And that's where they found it. The bow section where they were found, it's free of debris. Most of the debris came after the vessel. So that was a pretty flat, clear area. And so any objects that were on the surface of the ocean would be found, pretty clearly once they see it. And this debris also wouldn't have a lot of that growth and marine life and sand on it that you see right there.
Yes. Also, I was kind of curious as well. We know that about an hour and 45 minutes into the mission, the trip itself, that's when contact was lost. And I know it's kind of hard to predict, but it seems like the prevailing wisdom today, right now, is that is possibly the moment that the entire vessel imploded. Are you seeing that? Do you agree with that? Is there any evidence? Would there be any evidence to actually determine that?
Yeah, hour and 45 minutes is about 2 to 2.5 hours down to the bottom. And they've lost communication before. We've seen that repeatedly from stories that they've lost this. The survey of the bottom where the wreck is going to tell us that. If the debris field is close together, that means that the implosion happened closer to the bottom. If the debris is further apart, in other words, it happened at a height above Titanic, and the Gulf Stream came into effect and drift came in, then that debris pattern would be scattered over a much larger area. So they should be able to ascertain, based on the location of the debris, when it happened with the implosion on board.
Yeah, and I think, just kind of talking about, what these 5 on board went through during this, everyone was trying to kind of put themselves in their shoes throughout the course of this story. And then we got word that this theory might have been out there, and you and I talked about it just last night, that the structural integrity of the vessel itself could have caused an implosion because of the immense pressure put on the sub itself. And people are essentially saying that, it was pulverized, and people are asking, well, whether or not these bodies can be recovered. But that's not operative, is it? Because of the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, there's very low probability of recovering a body. I mean, just that pressure depth you're talking about would have crushed everything at that level. I think what we're going to see happen here next is part of the recovery operation will be to bring parts of the debris up. In particularly, what they're going to want to look for is that tubular shape that connected the two end caps where the passengers rode on board. That's really the area that's going to have the biggest question. That is that fiber alloy that's put together. They'll want to be able to examine that and see what exactly potentially happened. This goes into the jurisdiction of who's going to be doing an investigation in this. This hasn't been ironed out yet. My view is it's probably going to be a joint Coast Guard, NTSB, and Canadian investigation based on the ownership of the company and the Canadian vessels involved in here. But they're going to want to bring it up. They're probably not going to be able to bring up everything here, but they'll bring up as much as they can in order to retrace what exactly happened.
You know, one of the things that I was very concerned with is that, say this vessel lost power below and they couldn't come back up. There was virtually no way to tow them up. There was no way to save them. So knowing that also is a scary thought, I think, you know, because as we talked about before, there was no redundancy in any of their systems. Melanie's telling us there were text messaging communication. They didn't have a GPS beacon, even the one that would float to the surface. So knowing where they were, but the point was, if you lost power 2.5 miles down, there was no hope of being towed up. It's not going to be, you're going to call one of those towboats that they have in Long Island. You know, you're not going to, it's not going to happen.
No, there was no way to rescue them, really. I mean, I watched another expert who did a very, very long show on a local Florida station, and he said that there are maybe 3 or 4 submersibles that could even get down that far. And even if they did get down there, what could they do? They couldn't rescue them. So it's really sad that this happened, but also everyone knew this going in. I mean, this release that everybody signed is 3 pages long. It's a lot of legalese, but it pretty much spells it out.
Melanie,
So,
we're gonna get to that a little later. Let me just I got to go to a quick commercial. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell, make comments. We love to read your comments. If you want to support us financially, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. You see our friends, our fans with the green font in the chat. They're part of our YouTube channel membership family, and we really appreciate all our friends and all of our subs, fans, whatever you want to call them, but we really appreciate them. So the legal aspect of it is something, Melanie, maybe you want to address, that they signed these extensive waivers, fully realizing that they could die on this trip. And you saw the one guy we just showed in the video. He was like, "Where do I sign?" Whoa. You know, I don't think.
And he was a reporter, and he was just going down for the story. You know, I mean, this waiver is 3 long pages. I've highlighted it. I've gone through it a couple of times. This company was registered in the Bahamas, so this any lawsuits that would be brought would have to be brought in the Bahamas. It would be under Bahamian law. There's a large element of assumption of risk here. There's a large element of, I mean, they not only did they sign a waiver and a release, they signed a hold harmless agreement, an indemnification agreement. They signed off that their heirs, assigns, and relatives couldn't sue on their behalf. And it spells it out more than once. I mean, here's just one portion of it. A portion of the operation will be conducted inside an experimental submersible vessel. The experimental submersible vessel has not been approved or certified by any regulatory body and may be constructed of materials that have not been widely used in human-occupied submersibles. When diving below any ocean surface, this vessel will be subject to extreme pressure, and any failure of the vessel while I am aboard could cause severe injury or death. I understand that I may decline to participate in any dive below the ocean surface or any activity of the operation at any time. And then it goes on to talk about the support vessels that I may board. Could also expose me to property damage, injury, disability, or death. It goes into, other things, high pressure gases and other dangers that could lead to property damage, injury, disability, and death. We're going to be far away from any hospitals. Therefore, if I need any medical attention, I understand that the first aid on board of this support vessel is not going to be the same first aid that I would receive in a hospital. It's very, very, very extensive. And
Well,
my
let's stand
argument
up.
would, and I'm usually the first one to poke holes in waivers, you guys. Usually the first one to say that no waiver would ever hold up in court. But understand also, there's no insurance for this company. There was no maritime insurance company that would touch them with a 10-foot pole. So they had no insurance. My understanding is they have already filed for bankruptcy. So even if there was, if people were to bring lawsuits, because let's face it, lawyers are creative and they think that they can a lot of times overcome waivers like this. I don't know that there would be any pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, if you know what I'm saying. I don't think there would be a recovery in this case. Or these
But
cases.
Melanie, despite
Tragic.
everything you just read, people willingly signed that waiver
Right.
and got on this vessel and paid $250,000 a person
Right.
to do so.
Right. My other argument would be, look, if you can afford $250,000 to go on this experimental vessel for basically a very risky expedition, you also have a lawyer on retainer that would probably review any documents that you would sign before you would go on it. Right.
I would think so. But, one of the things I wanted to mention is we all know the great movie director, producer, James Cameron. And he has done extensive submersible investigation of the Titanic and actually designed some of the submersibles that he used. And he spoke out very, very outwardly, very openly about the danger of this vessel and how it was not seaworthy. I'm going to play a little bit of that. But he also said, in one way, the CEO of this company was somewhat like, and of course that's Stockton Rush. You see the first person to the left out of the 5 folks that lost their life. He was somewhat like this is what James Cameron compared him to, the captain on the Titanic. Because the captain on the Titanic was told, you're going into a massive ice field. Take that as a warning and proceed with great caution. Instead, he steamed full speed ahead, and we all know what happened. So that is was that reckless? It seems so. Was the owner of the CEO of this company, Stockton Rush, was this conduct reckless? Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, Billy. Recklessness always depends, is gauged as to, what was your knowledge? What was your mental state? What did you know? What were you advised? What is your experience? And then you take into account everything you're told, the condition of your vessel, the condition of the water, and then you make your best judgment, your prudent judgment. And the idea that, he knew, Stockton Rush knew that I think it's called the Marine Technology Society back in 2018, criticized his development of this submarine and said that it didn't meet, industry standards. And when you don't meet industry standards, you don't have to exceed them, but you have to at least meet them for anybody not to consider you to be doing something very prudent. To not meet standards is negligence right then and there. And when you've got people's lives at stake, as in this case, I mean, that's absolutely reckless. And that's the sad thing, is that even though you've got that wonderful hold harmless agreement and the waiver, Melanie had it, it's like pages and pages. It seemed like, as Melanie, as you're reading it, I'm thinking to myself, they put more time and effort into writing that hold harmless agreement, that waiver, than they did in probably number of dives. I would like to know how many times that model went down and what depth. Did it go down only twice to 1,000 feet? Did it go down to 800 feet and come back? How many times was it, what was the number of the testing period? Was it over 6 months and 50 dives? I want to know that. And I think that with the company going broke and the CEO passed away, no money, no insurance, like Melanie said, who's going to insure you? There's no insurance company. That's the absolute definition of recklessness.
And gross
Absolutely.
negligence is another way to overcome a waiver, and it could be argued that there was gross negligence in this case. However, this release of liability agreement, which is what it's titled, is very, very, very comprehensive.
I want to play a bit of James Cameron, who will sound now like the voice of reason to this whole situation.
Is the director, James Cameron himself, along with his Oscar-winning movie. Mr. Cameron, I understand you've made a number of dives to the wreckage site too. Just give us your sense on what you're feeling right now, looking at these images of the shipwreck that you studied so closely, and now hearing that another tragedy has been tied to the same area.
Well, I've been down there many times. I know the wreck site very well, as does my friend Bob Ballard. I've made 33 dives. I actually calculated that I've spent more time on the ship than the captain did back in the day. And of course, as a submersible designer myself, I designed and built a sub to go to the deepest place in the ocean, 3 times deeper than Titanic. So I understand the engineering problems associated with building this type of vehicle and all the safety protocols that you have to go through. And I think that what Bob said, because I was watching, is absolutely critical for people to really get the take-home message from this, from our effort here, is deep submergence diving is a mature art. From the early 60s, where there were a few accidents, nobody was killed in the deep submergence, until now, is more time than between Kitty Hawk and the flight of the first 747. So if we haven't improved over that period of time, and we have improved drastically over that period of time, and the certification protocols that all other deep submergence vehicles, except this one, that carry passengers, especially paying passengers, all over the world in tropical waters, deep coral reefs, other wreck sites, and so on. The safety record is the gold standard. Absolutely. Not only no fatalities, but no major incidents requiring all of these assets to converge to a site. Of course, that's the nightmare that we've all lived with, since all of us entered this field of deep exploration. We live with it in the back of our minds. But because implosion, as Bob described it, such a violent event, is first and foremost in our minds, the pressure boundary, which is what they call the hull of the sub, that people go inside, is obviously first and foremost in our minds as engineers. And we spend so much time and energy on that. And we use all the computerized tools available today, finite element analysis. We worked on our sphere for our deep vehicle that went to the Challenger Deep for over 3 years, just in the computer, before we even made the thing. And then, of course, we pressure tested it over and over and over, and so on. So, this is a mature art, and many people in the community were very concerned about this sub, and a number of the top players in the deep submergence engineering community even wrote letters to the company saying that what they were doing was too experimental to carry passengers and that needed to be certified, and so on. So I'm struck by the similarity of the Titanic disaster itself, where the captain was repeatedly warned about ice ahead of his ship, and yet he steamed at full speed into an ice field on a moonless night. And
That's amazing to me. People have also, they say the families of surviving families of people that were on the Titanic don't, they consider this almost like as a grave site, so that this exploration can almost be looked at from the family's perspective as a desecration of a grave site. Melanie?
Yeah, they don't think that it should be a tourist attraction. They think it should be viewed more as a graveyard and not a tourist attraction. I think they're very offended by that. And,
Mike?
Yeah, leave it be. We have federal law that prohibits anyone from going to World War II sunken ship sites and stealing, because there's skeletal remains of sailors and Marines. So Absolutely. You don't touch it. You could look, but you don't touch. And sadly, in shipwrecks that are less at much less depth, much closer to shore, where a person who's got pretty good scuba skills can go down, there is theft. So this is the kind of thing that people should just not go there. And if you want to see a good video of it, there's the stuff that Bob Ballard took and James Cameron took the video when they first saw the Titanic back in the 90s. Just leave it be. Just leave it be.
Absolutely.
And many people died as a result. And for a very similar tragedy where warnings went unheeded to take place at the same exact site, with all the diving that's going on all around the world, I think it's just astonishing. It's really quite surreal. And of course, P.H. Nargeolet, the French legendary submersible dive pilot, a friend of mine. It's a very small community. I've known PH for 25 years. For him to have died tragically in this way is almost impossible for me to process.
It is certainly haunting to consider that comparison to the Titanic and what happened to the 5 people on board this submersible vehicle. James, I want to ask you, though, since you've been down on these dive missions before, we talked about the safety risks. We've reported on the fact that the people on board signed waivers. They knew that this was dangerous and that there weren't very many other vehicles that could come get them out if something goes wrong. How aware were you of those concerns and those risks before you went down? And is there anything that should be done when it comes to safety in the future?
Look, it's comparing apples and oranges here. I went with a very proven system when I dove at Titanic with the Russian submersibles. They used very, very well understood design methodologies, and they had an excellent operating record when I dove with them, and they continued to have an excellent operating record, flawless operating record throughout their entire career. I think they're now retired. But I always had great confidence. Now, having said that, I always had confidence in the sub. The Titanic wreck site is a very hostile place. It's a dangerous site to dive. If you think of a typical research dive, you go down and you're really just operating over a bottom. You may be looking for organisms. You may be looking at geology. Hydrothermal vent sites can be a bit dangerous as well. But Titanic, you've got this 8-story, 10-story high structure with overhanging metal structures. It's a twisted mess. You can get entangled. And entanglement was always a concern of ours, but we dove with a 2-sub system. We always felt confident that if one of the subs got ensnared, you'd still have communication, you'd still have life support, you'd still have power, you'd have another sub there that could help you manage the problem. We always felt that we were on pretty safe ground. This sub had no backup. It didn't have a lot of backup systems from what I understand, and it was predicated on what I think of as a fundamentally flawed design principle, which is a carbon fiber hull, which when I first heard about a move toward composite hulls, and this was many years ago, even when I was designing my sub, there was another sub that was in competition with us to get to the Challenger Deep that was operated by a guy named Chris Welsh for Richard Branson. And they had a composite hull, and I told those guys, I said, somebody's going to get killed in that sub or in a sub like it. And the DNA of the Ocean Gate sub was in that sub at the time, 2 hemispherical end caps and a carbon fiber cylinder in the center. And I never believed in that, because the way it fails is it delaminates, because you have to have a hull, a pressure hull made out of a contiguous material like steel or like titanium, which is the proven standard, or like acrylic. I have a small equity stake in I think one of the best submersible companies in the world, Triton Submersibles, and they use acrylic for their hulls. But once again, it's a contiguous material, so you can do computer modeling to see how it'll behave. But this Ocean Gate sub had sensors on the inside of the hull to give them a warning when it was starting to crack. And I think if that's your idea of safety, then you're doing it wrong. You don't.
Amazing. Just amazing when you listen to that. It just seems like, I don't know. You hate to criticize someone that's not around, but it just seems like quackery that someone would take this vessel down to 2.5 miles deep, made out of an inferior composite material that just wasn't going to stand up over time. Maybe it stood up once or twice, but the third time, as you said, Melanie, was not the charm.
You know, what's interesting that you were talking about the families of the victims of the Titanic, that the CEO and pilot of this sub, Stockton Rush, his wife is the great-great-granddaughter of Ida Strauss and Isidore Strauss, co-founders of Macy's department store, who actually were one of the wealthy couples that died on the Titanic.
Wow.
They were depicted, if anybody remembers the movie Titanic, as the elderly couple at the end that was holding hands in bed while the Titanic sank. So his wife actually is a descendant of these people who perished in the Titanic.
You know, I think there's something really to be said about a vessel like that, really of being a gravesite. And it is almost like they, even with the ground zero, and Mike and I were first responders, it's a holy site to us. You know, it's the gravesite of almost 3,000 people, you know, and the same thing with the Titanic here is it's really, holy ground almost, but underneath the ocean, that there's all these people that lost their lives in this tragedy. Mike?
Yeah, Billy, it's a place that, as Mr. Cameron said, it's a very dangerous place to be, very inhospitable, and even someone as smart as a CEO and their own engineers, they did cut corners, but they were willing to take the risk. But there's no reason really for anyone to take that risk. To even if you're wealthy, it's not worth it. It's the adventure is great, and that's a wonderful spirit to have. And if you're going to risk it, it's like in business, people talk about entrepreneurs risking everything and rolling the dice and maybe coming up and winning. But in this sort of situation, even in the best conditions, it is absolutely dangerous. I don't think James Cameron would go on any expedition and not worried. It's not to the point of like normalcy. We're just going to go down there like a trip to the deli to get a gallon of milk. No, there's so much inherent danger in any submersible that goes to that site, no matter how well it's constructed. And he talked about having two submersibles right next to each other to provide mutual support. And so this sort of thing, it's great. The adventurous spirit, I salute it. But for purposes of trying to make money off of it, almost as if it's a business, leads to shortcuts, and unfortunately in this case has led to the tragic and unnecessary death of 5 people.
Absolutely. Guys, just one quick commercial. Folks, if you're looking for a great attorney in the New York metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer and a fantastic defense attorney. You can reach Joe on his cell at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com. You can go on his website, jmurray-law.com. Joe's also a huge supporter, one of our earliest supporters of the Police Off the Cuff podcast, and we salute Joe Murray. It's this whole thing, and Melanie, you spoke about the liability here and all that stuff, but the biggest thing that we wanted to sort of impart to our listeners here is the human element of this. And yes, we understand the adventure. We understand that people want to experience this thing, but sometimes, I think that, I don't know, call it common sense, call it what you will, maybe a little healthy amount of fear that can make you think a different way. It seemed like, with again, when it went on beat a dead horse, but without certifying this vessel and this extensive waiver, I think that should have really raised a lot of red flags to the folks that went on this trip.
Everyone that I've been talking to about this, everybody says, who would want to do this? Who would want to do this? You know, there's this whole new area of tourism called extreme tourism. You know, I mean, I don't even want to bungee jump or skydive like that. It's just not for me. But who would want to do this? And Stockton Rush gave an interview a year or two ago, and he said, we have like 4 kinds of people that want to do this. Titaniacs, who are people who are fascinated with the Titanic. He said, some people have mortgaged their homes to come. Not everybody is a billionaire. There was one woman, and we showed a clip of her. She was a bank executive who saved up for 30 years to go on this trip. She called it her Ferrari. She said, some people want a Ferrari. This is what I want. And I think she had been on 2 prior missions or expeditions of this vessel that did not go forward, and she was in tears about it. Then she finally got to go on one of the successful missions. And he also had one lottery winner who went on one of his successful expeditions. So there's the answer of who would want to do this, I guess.
I guess it's like the people that are waiting to the flight to Mars and they start selling those tickets. There'll be a line of people that will want to do it. I mean, I'm not going to be on that line, but there will be a line of people that want to try that. I don't think you'll be on that line either, Mike.
No, I'm going to be standing right next to you. We're going to be at a bar watching it on TV.
Watching it on TV, exactly. This is Commander Robert Ballard. He was the first one, I believe, to find the Titanic in, I believe it was 1985.
With remotely operated vehicles last time in 2004. But yes, it's very tragic what happened. I know the people that passed away. I've known Stockton for 20 years, and I know this was his dream. So my heart goes out to he and his family and the families of all the people who lost loved ones. This tragic event more than likely took place on Sunday when they lost connection with the surface. More than likely, they, as they were experiencing difficulties, began to drop their weights and ascend to the surface. They never made it. So if you're on your way up and you're buoyant and you don't make it, it's a catastrophic implosion. And I don't think people can appreciate the amazing energy involved in the destructive process of an implosion. I've explored the Thresher and the Scorpion, which were 2 U.S. submarines. In the case of the Scorpion, ended up at a similar depth, and it just takes and literally shreds everything. So it's extremely powerful. And then that's what they'll be doing right now. They're now below the circulation system of the ocean in that area. So they'll do a systematic mapping. Those ROVs can remain. I have one just like it, the one over my shoulder. Hercules is on my ship. In fact, you can see in the image, I'm in my command center. My ship's at sea right now. Unfortunately, we were unable to help because we're in the Pacific Ocean, but it's a very similar technology. And the beauty of these remotely operated vehicles is they can stay down days and days and days. So they'll be mapping all through the night and into the next day until they believe they've done 100% systematic coverage of the wreck site. And then the analysis of that database will start to tell the larger story.
And Bob, since you are so familiar with the site of the wreckage and also these other submersible vehicles that go down and explore things like the Titanic, we've been reporting on for a few years now concerns over this specific vehicle, the carbon fiber titanium combination that essentially made up the shell of this, for lack of a better word. Did you have a sense initially when you first learned that the vehicle was lost that perhaps something catastrophic may have happened?
Well, you have to understand that we began taking vehicles into the deep sea with the historic dive of the Thresher, the Trieste in Challenger Deep in 1960. We've made thousands and thousands of dives with different vehicles, whether they're French, whether they're Russian, whether they're American. And we've never had ever in the history of these extreme deep diving programs ever lost a vehicle. So this is a first. And so you naturally go to, how does this vehicle differ from the vehicles that we've been using for many years? And it did have a very experimental hull, and obviously that hull imploded.
And Bob, do you think, given what happened here, that there ought to be an end or at least a temporary pause to this type of tourism, to go see the Titanic wreckage while they sort out what happened?
Well, again, as you know, I was opposed to taking anything from the Titanic, but I've never been opposed to people visiting as long as they do it in a safe way. We've gone back. Jim Cameron mounted numerous expeditions there. Again, what's different about a submarine, for example, than an airplane? An airplane, gravity is your enemy. But if you have a deep submersible, buoyancy is your friend. All you have to do when you're in trouble is get light and you go home. And I'm sure they were attempting to get light and go home, but the hull itself imploded. So that's where you'll see all the energy focusing on any future regulations on safety. But again, I want to point out this has never happened in our deep submergence world, beginning from when we first started in 1960.
And again,
it's
Bob,
safer. If you look at our history, it's safer to be in a submarine like Alvin that I spent many years in than driving on I-95.
Well, Bob Ballard, we certainly appreciate your insight and expertise on all of this.
Pretty amazing, right? Safer than driving on I-95. But this was sort of an aberration in the fact that they used this new material. That, again, I like what he said. The way you get out, you get light. And what he meant was it's called ballast. They get rid of heavy I don't know what most submarines use as ballast, but in this case, they had sort of an antiquated system too. They had those like pipes. Like how would you unload those actual pipes to get light? I don't know what the system was. I would imagine in a real submarine, maybe they actually use water as ballast. They flood some of the area, and then to raise up, they let the water back out. But I don't know what this submersible used. Any thoughts?
I had heard at one point they thought that they were trying to get rid of some of the weight on the vehicle, but you got me.
Yeah, I think there was a part we saw in the video there that they had like pieces of pipe, like fence posts, almost like weighting them down. So you would just drop these from some sort of claw, drop it, and you'd be lighter and you'd be light enough to float to the surface. But I think was it also that maybe the sub was overloaded because I think it was supposed to be for 4. Now there was 5.
I think it could hold 5 people, and I think that's why that other gentleman that we just watched his video said this has never happened before. That's because there are no submersibles that will fit 5 people. Most of them only will hold 2 people. So, it's never happened before until it happens.
Right.
And now it happened. I mean, look, I heard somebody say that we know more about the surface of the moon and Mars than we know about the depths of our oceans. And our oceans, our water is 80% of our planet. And that by people paying this money, it's funding research for us to see what's at the bottom of the ocean. I had no idea that we knew more about what's in outer space than we do at the bottom of our own oceans, which I found very interesting. Somebody's in the chat with some very, very strong opinions about homicide, investigations about this and how they should be, criminally charged. And, my argument to that is these people went on this with their free will. I mean, they had the free will to do this or not do this. I don't see any homicide charges coming out of this. You guys?
No, first of all, when people loosely use the word homicide simply means death caused by another. And I don't think that qualifies at all here because not anyone on that boat. You could stretch it to gross negligence or gross recklessness or criminal negligence, but the person that would be charged with that was on this vessel with them, and he died too. There's no charges to be levied.
Right, even
Anything
like
that could
against the
happen,
corporation.
yeah, anything that could happen here would be civil in nature. And Melanie, you as an attorney said, and Mike may agree with you, that waiver may and may not cover them because it was an extensive waiver, and the company's already gone bankrupt. So it's sort of all academic as far as conspiracy theories. I think they were right out front being negligent. No certification, no inspection. There was no one was trying to hide anything. They took shortcuts and they paid with their lives.
I'm not seeing any criminal charges here. I just wanted to run that by you guys because I just don't see it.
No, you think about it and you're like, you're right, Mr. Stockton. He's passed away, and there's not always going to be a civil or criminal cure for a wrong done to someone. There's not always going to be a law, civil or criminal, to cover this sort of thing or that sort of thing or something else. Sometimes these things happen, and you have to live with it. And unfortunately, for everyone concerned, there's not going to be any sort of compensation monetarily or in watching someone go to prison for this. No, it's not going to happen.
People are also saying without great risk by inventors, we wouldn't have electricity, automobiles, airplanes, aeronautics.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is this guy was charging people $250,000 to go on his little invention. So, I see that, but also, there's great risk taking in invention and innovation. So there's that aspect of it as well.
We started out the show with talking about people that are explorers, people that are adventurers. Again, what you guys were just saying is people that take great risk to do things. And you heard they were talking about this Frenchman, Paul-Henri Nargeolet, is one of the well-known people in this type of submersion, this type of exploration, and 73 years old, and he's basically a legend in this area, which is a very small community. I'm sure everyone knows each other, but this is a huge tragedy. It's not something that's going to happen. Hopefully not again, but again, we can keep talking about this. There was negligence here, and absolutely. And look, we as Americans, we always want to assign blame. We want to blame somebody. Whose fault was this? And you can blame lots of things. You can blame lots of people. Guys, we're at an hour and 13 minutes. I think we should start to wind this down. Certainly, it's been an interesting hour and 13 minutes. This is not really our strength, our true crime, but it's such an interesting international story that we couldn't help but cover this, and it was quite interesting to cover it. And it's not, what do we call that, a wheelhouse? It's not in any of our wheelhouses as experts on this topic. However, very, very interesting. Mike, I'm going to throw it to you first. Your final words.
Yeah, I think that people should realize that, anytime you're trying to push a boundary in science or in exploration or whatever it is, there's going to be great risk. One of my favorite movies is called The Right Stuff, and it talks about the sound, breaking the sound barrier that people thought was actually physically impossible. And it talks about the Gemini and the Apollo, the Mercury program. And you watch that, and then you realize you have great respect for people who are willing to take risks and put their own hide on the line. Push the boundaries as much as they can, and that's part of the American spirit, and that's wonderful. The tragedy here is not that the inventor passed, but that he took 4 innocent people with him, and that's what we should mourn. But that's about it.
Very well said, Mike. Melanie, your final words.
Our thoughts and prayers go to the families of the victims: Hamish Harding, who was a British billionaire explorer; Paul-Henri Nargeolet, who was a French Titanic expert; Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman, who he's a Pakistani billionaire. A lot of people in the chat were commenting that his son did not want to go on this trip. And I don't know if that's true or not, but because it was Father's Day, he wanted to be with his dad. And so he actually bought this trip as a gift for his dad. And Stockton Rush, who some people may call crazy and some people may call a genius. I mean, fine line between genius and insanity, but he did go down with his ship in the end. So our thoughts and prayers are to all of them.
Yeah, you know something, there are no winners in this situation. There's no one really, I'm sure there's going to be a million lawyers trying to assign blame to this and trying to find money to get in a lawsuit. But it seems like, you know, everything was somewhat covered. The waiver, the people knew what they were getting into. There was a great deal of negligence, but is that what we want? I mean, it's bad enough all these 5 people lost their lives. All we could say is that in the future, maybe there needs to be international maritime laws on certification for vessels, not just per country. Like even if you go into international waters, your vessel should have to be certified to some level so that these type of tragedies don't happen. Folks, I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight, especially all you folks who came from Duty Ron's show. And if you're not subscribed to Police Off the Cuff, subscribe on our YouTube. It's free. Just give us a thumbs up and ring that bell. Again, this story is going to be around for a while, but thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Melanie and Professor Mike, thank you guys for coming by tonight, and have a great rest of your weekend.
Don't forget to hit the like button.
That's right.
One episode just ain't enough.